Welcome to the Global Gurus podcast, a 15-minute conversation with thinkers shaping the future of leadership in business. Every episode, we ask 3 questions of our guests. What unique challenges are you seeing among your client base or across the world where you work? What methodologies or frameworks are you bringing to bear to help solve those challenges? And what sorts of results are you seeing among your clients? I'm Mark Nation. I'm here joined by Laura Gassner-Otting. Hey, Laura.
Hello.
And today we have Brenda Bence. Brenda is the #1 leader in personal branding and the #3 leader in coaching, speaking, training, etc. So we're really excited to have you, Brenda. How are you?
Oh, good, great. Good to see you, Mark. Good to see you, Laura.
All right, let's get into it. So Brenda, what sorts of challenges are you seeing across the client base with whom you work?
Yeah, well, listen, from a broad standpoint, the biggest challenge today is, I think, definitely leading in the middle of constant uncertainty. You know, leaders, we've always dealt with uncertainty, but what's different today is the intensity and the persistence of it. And I think that's where the real risk shows up. And that's particularly at the top. So I tend to work at the top of major corporations. And the decisions to put the right leaders at the top of those organizations has such a massive impact. So that's where I focus. And that's specifically around succession. So how do you deal with succession in the midst of uncertainty in big corporations? That's really where I focus.
So I'm fascinated with the question of succession because I spent 20 years in executive search. So, we spent a lot of time thinking about this question. What's the unique framework that you bring to helping? I was reading on your website, you have 100% success rate. I mean, give us the goods.
Yeah. So here's the thing, Laura, it's a great question. I know your background. It's not about capability at that level. It's about misjudging readiness, especially for what's next, and especially in those critical succession moments. And Mark mentioned my past and my branding experience. At that level, your brand isn't about visibility. It's about credibility. It's about trust at those highest levels. And it's so critical. You will know this, Laura, but 60 to 70% of executive transitions fail within the first 18 months of taking on a new role. So I experienced this firsthand myself when I was in a Fortune 100 succession pipeline. And there was just very little transparency, lots of smoke and mirrors. And I saw how that created mistrust, it created confusion, and just ultimately really poor decisions were made. And so when the situation calls for a new strategy, we tend to fall back on old patterns. And that's where the biggest gap shows up between the role that's required now and then the leader that's actually the way the actual leader is operating today. So my methodology is, I tend to believe that the simplest is the most powerful. And because if a method is simple, it's going to be usable and it's going to be memorable. So I developed this concept when I saw all these issues with C-suite succession. It was like simply called top 10 characteristics. And what it is just a curated list of what success really looks like in those C-suite positions, specific to that company. What are the top 10 characteristics that are absolutely critical to success in those top 10 positions? And not just today, but where the company is going. And so I work with executives, board members, C-suite execs, et cetera, executive leadership teams to get them together and get clear on what those top 10 characteristics are that are needed in the CEO, the CFO, the CSO, the CIO, the CIEIO, I jokingly say, positions. And doesn't that sound obvious, right? And I can tell you hand on heart, I have never yet worked with a corporation, and I've worked with dozens of the largest in the world, I've never met a set of leaders within a company that all agreed on what was necessary for success in those top jobs. So it explains why succession has typically been such smoke and mirrors. We are not clear on how to cut through and drive clarity at those high end.
So it's very interesting because when I would go in to start a search with an organization, they would all say things like, we want a charismatic, smart, compelling leader. And I was like, charismatic with what audience? Smart on what topic? Compelling in what ways? And they would all say the same words, but they would define them differently. So then once somebody got in the role, they would fail because they were like, well, that's not what I wanted them to be smart about. So as you're applying this framework, I mean, obviously the top 10 characteristics, there may be some overlap, there may be some that are different. Talk to us about some of the specific impact that you've seen and the value that this framework brings.
Well, part of it is just getting people together to talk about these things. Again, that sounds so obvious, but we often don't take the time to do that. And for example, I like to say to them, often what happens, most of them are all businessy. Well, I need them to hit the P&L and I need to make sure they do, but what about the people? Or it'll be just the opposite. It's all about the people and there's nothing about the business. So you've got to find that, we only have two missions as leaders, right? Build the business, build the people. It's that simple. So how do you balance those two? And what happens is things change. I'll give you an example. That was called in to work with a leader, and this particular leader was coming in it from a CFO. This person was the CFO and was in succession to be the CEO. And so I had to sit with the CEO and the board and say, what do you want the CEO to look like and feel like? What's it supposed to be like, right? Well, what ended up happening was they kept looking at this person through the lens of a CFO. They couldn't see that person through anything other than a CFO. So you have to actually not just create clarity around the positions themselves, but you have to help the board, the CEO, see the clarity themselves of the biases they may be having around those jobs and what's critically important to those jobs. So that's an example. Another one, I called in to work with a CFO who they said, we just need a safe pair of hands. We're going to do this safe pair of hands. And so this person was promoted to CFO because they been with the company for many, many years. Well, guess what? The CEO within a matter of months has a new strategy and says, you know what? We don't need a safe pair of hands anymore. What we really need is a wheeler dealer because we're going to start an M&A strategy. Well, guess what? That CFO isn't an M&A wheeler dealer type of person. So it's this, you have to really get clear and think future, not just where we are, but where we're going to be successful with this methodology.
Brenda, I'm curious. I know we won't be able to get into all the 10 characteristics, but of the 10, what 2 or 3 are the most common themes that you see among your clients? And do you see some interesting mix that combines an element of personal branding with coaching and leader development?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the key things that I have found is decision making. It's such a critical capability, and yet it's one of those that in the midst of all the uncertainty we have, that's the challenge, is how do you make decisions in the midst of uncertainty? Making decisions isn't difficult. Making decisions in uncertainty is difficult. The way I play with, so leadership and branding, those are my 2 sweet spots and how they fit together. From my branding background, I used to run billion-dollar brands, and then leadership, I led them. So I love the combination of those 2. And so how I integrate this into the top 10 characteristics is the most successful successors it's about 50% external branding, meaning how you're perceived by the board, stakeholders, the way people perceive, think, and feel about you, maybe the government, depends on the position that they're in. The other is 50% internal branding, and I mean within oneself. How do I perceive, think, and feel about me, right? Am I ready for this position? And there's a lot of imposter syndrome at the top of big corporations, which I think always surprises a lot of people, but it makes sense, right? You've got to do the inner work. After all, imposter syndrome happens with highly successful people. So a lot of them are very highly successful. And as a result, they suffer from that imposter syndrome. So 50% is external perceptions, 50% is internal perceptions, that internal branding.
When I was writing my last book, I interviewed 100 different glass ceiling shatterers, Olympic medalists, startup unicorns, CEOs, philanthropists, activists, and every single one of them had imposter syndrome. And I was amazed at this because I thought, like, I'm going to interview them and I'm finally going to find my way out of imposter syndrome. And what I realized is that they just, it's not that they don't have it, it's that they're actually able to use it as a tool to congratulate them for being somewhere that they haven't been before. And I thought that ability to self-talk into this is excitement and this is experiment and this is opportunity was a real differentiator between people who saw it as a limitation versus an invitation. Do you see that as part of that characteristic set?
I do, to a certain extent. I will tell you that when it comes to imposter syndrome, Laura, for me, when you name it, you claim it, and then you can clean it. Because often what happens is they don't even know they're suffering or they're experiencing imposter syndrome. So I have a 13-point, this is another tool that I use, a 13-point questionnaire. And if they answer yes to at least 5 or more, they're likely experiencing imposter syndrome. It's questions like, most of the time I feel like a fraud. I attribute my position to luck, hard work or overwork, someone's relationship that just, they like me, they brought me along, and or the last one we talked about is a mistake. It's a mistake. I was just working with a CEO last week, and it was like they've made a mistake. I shouldn't be in this position. And so just helping them to name it, claim it, then you can look at it and dissect each one of those and say, let's look at that. Is that really true? And again, because imposter syndrome happens with people who are so wildly successful, when they start to claim, oh, I have really been successful. Yeah, actually, then that confidence starts to come back. So it's
impressive.
I find imposter syndrome interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Like it's hard to argue with facts, right? Like you have the emotions around it, but then if you start making a list of what you've actually accomplished, you're like, oh, actually, it might actually be pretty good. But how do you pull people from the identity that they had yesterday, maybe as a CFO, into this identity that they can be a CEO in this organization, if the organization that's a skill set that they need? I think that identity shift is a really interesting question because we so often cling to the successes that live in a house built by yesterday's ambitions, that how we get to tomorrow's takes an identity shift that we're not always necessarily capable of. And I guess that's the role of the coach.
Yeah, I really love that. I always say that the past created the present. So the present is just a reflection of what's the past. That's all. The present is just a reflection of the past, right? The future, therefore, where we want to go, cannot actually be the present or the past because it's reflective of both. So if you're really going to make a shift, you have to learn to let go of both the present and the past. And that is really hard for a lot of people, especially when you relied on it for success. So that's why the top 10 characteristics are just so critical, because it looks at here's what the role looks like. Here's what clarity is around this. Isn't it great to have clarity around those top 10 characteristics that you want to? Let's go through them. Let's pick out the top 3 that you're already doing well at. Let's pick out the bottom 3 that probably you could do the best at, or you want to do better at. And then we'll find those ones in the middle, and we're not going to worry about those for right now. Let's just focus on those, let's leverage the top 3 and really, so when you start to build a system around it, it builds the confidence, and they suddenly realize they can let go of the past and the present because it's not serving them anyway. To get where they want to go, they have to let go of both of those things. And it can be very scary, especially as we started out this conversation, in times of uncertainty.
So true. So true. Brenda, we only have a couple of minutes left. I'm sure many people will watch this episode and be curious how they can reach out to you and learn more. Tell folks how they can reach you.
Sure. Yeah. Just visit my website, brendabence.com. I have a newsletter sign up there. In fact, the newsletter sign up will give you the most common top 10 characteristics of core C-suite positions. So it's good to kind of do a little self-check, a little quiz to see how you think you're doing on that. I do weekly LinkedIn leadership insights, and then happy to also talk about a new book that's coming out. Would you want to work for you? It's a good question to ask. It's got the 16 top people leadership challenges that I regularly see and how to address them.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Brenda. It's always a pleasure catching up with you. And we appreciate your time and your insights here. So There you
Thank
have it,
you.
folks. 3 questions, 1 methodology, real results. That's what we explore each episode of Global Gurus. So I'm Mark Nation, here again with Laura Gassner Auding. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye now.